Dr. White.
All right, so thank you to everyone for coming to a linguistic turn in composition, a conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Baddour. So in order to get this started out, we're going to play a video. This video may be familiar to you from chapel, but just to remind us about who Dr. Williamson was and specifically what a year of Dr. Juanita Williamson is all about. Please join LeMoyne-Owen College in celebrating a year of Dr. Juanita V. Williamson, writing, research, and social change. Dr. Juanita Virginia Williamson was a pioneering linguist, educator, and scholar whose influence extended far beyond the classroom. Born to Mississippi sharecroppers, she graduated summa cum laude from LeMoyne College in 1938 and later earned an MA from Atlanta University. Her perseverance and discipline carried her through her doctoral program at the University of Michigan, where she earned a PhD in 1961 in linguistics. Joining the faculty of LeMoyne-Owen College in 1947, Williamson rose to the rank of Professor of English and Chair of the Humanities Division. She co-authored A Various Language in 1971, a key reference in linguistic studies, and her research on Southern and Black speech earned her national recognition and honors. Deeply invested in the success of Black students, she examined the relationship between speech patterns and learning performance, championing historically Black colleges as transformative spaces. Though she could have pursued opportunities elsewhere, Williamson chose to remain at LeMoyne-Owen College, where she became known as tough, witty, brilliant, and deeply caring toward her students. On LOC's campus, there is an archive room in Steele Hall and a writing center in the Hollis F. Price Library named for Dr. Williamson. Her name is also inscribed on the muted bell sculpture on the University of Memphis' campus. Her legacy lives through the countless individuals she inspired, whose achievements continue to reflect her commitment to knowledge, excellence, and community. LeMoyne-Owen College celebrates a year of Dr. Juanita V. Williamson, writing, research, and social change. All right. So again, a year of Dr. Juanita V.
Some administration has been vocal about freedom of speech.
That too. That too. We're gonna get to some of that today too. Let me just say that. So with that being said, my name is Dr. Seth E, and I'm an assistant professor of English and Communications here at LeMoyne-Owen College. And as I said, we're celebrating a year of Dr. Juanita V. Williamson, writing, research, and social change. So specifically, my journey with Dr. Juanita Williamson started with my interview for my job here at LeMoyne-Owen College. For most of us in the humanities, I think this is the truth for you, our interview takes place in the Juanita V. Williamson archive room that's in Steele Hall. And so when I walked in and saw this picture of this lady on the wall, of course, my initial reaction was, who the hell is this? You know, she must be someone grand that they would name a whole room after her, you know. And so essentially my journey has been kind of learning a little bit more and a little bit more. Like for instance, with Dr. Williamson, the metaphor that I used to discuss her impact specifically with like composition is, at first I thought I was just studying a person, you know, almost like the top of a pyramid, you know, a buried pyramid. But the more I began to study her, the more I started to answer or ask the question, what would a Black woman in the 1940s and 50s, why would she be so in love with the English language? You know, or why would she be so in love with the white man's English? And what essentially I found out that wasn't her love. She had a love for language, you know, all forms of language. Even while she was a student at LeMoyne-Owen College, she was a member of the Spanish language organization on campus. So with that being said, the more I learned, again, it felt like I was dusting grains of sand off a pyramid. And after a while, I started to see that my whole career, not just me as a person, my whole career was essentially built on a lot of the ideas that Dr. Williamson promoted. So with that being said, in my journey to understand Dr. Williamson, you cannot research Dr. Williamson and not run into the work of Dr. Elizabeth Baddour. You know, and so with that being said, upon reading some, I ain't said I read your whole dissertation, let's be clear, but upon reading her work, that's when I felt like I was really able to kind of understand what it is that Dr. Williamson was trying to do with her research. So in order to kind of unpack that, I felt like we need to have some good talk, some good shop talk with the experts. So one, let me go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So who would like to start first?
Sure, I'll go first. Once again, my name is Dr. Anderson. I'm an assistant professor here at LeMoyne-Owen College. I actually just started as a full-time assistant professor maybe a couple of months ago, right back in August. So it is a pleasure being here. I started off as an adjunct. A little background information about me, which it seems like it kind of coincides with Dr. Juanita Williamson as well. I too started off with Spanish. That's actually my first degree that I obtained. It was a bachelor's in Spanish from the University of Memphis with a minor in international business. And then I moved forward to get my master's in Romance languages, concentrating in Spanish. Now, I earned enough credits to be a credentialed Spanish instructor, but I found my passion through linguistics when I started to learn about linguisticas aplicadas, as we say in our Spanish classes. And I ended up transitioning to learning how to teach English as a second language, thus getting my master's in ESL. And surprisingly enough, they wanted to keep me around at the University of Memphis. And I just kind of rolled into the PhD program of applied linguistics. And so that is where I got my terminal degree, deeming me as the first African-American male to get his PhD in applied linguistics from the University of Memphis. So that's pretty much my journey in a nutshell and how I kind of got to where I am today.
Did you know Charles Hall?
Yeah.
Okay, he was there.
Let's actually put this up here.
Okay, yeah, I'm not used to the voice thing here. Here, you might want to keep it. Okay, am I supposed to?
Yeah, just talk.
All right, look, I'm Elizabeth Baddour, Dr. Elizabeth Baddour. I'm not used to saying that. It's my privilege to be here. I discovered Juanita Williamson, and I talked a little bit about that at the chapel last week, because I was reading a work by an African-American scholar named Keith Gilyard, in which he mentioned her, and I thought, well, she's from Memphis, I'm here at the University of Memphis, let me check this out. So, a long way around the barn, I got in touch with some folks here at LeMoyne-Owen, and they let me play around in the archive, and I discovered more and more. I did my master's thesis on that, and I thought, man, I gotta get my PhD. This lady is, you just can't scratch the surface on her, she's just amazing. So, I got my PhD, I taught at the University of Memphis for 10 years, and then my husband retired, and I thought, you know what, I think I'm gonna hang it up too. So now, I just kind of freelance, and I submit papers to conferences, and, you know, I just kind of do things like that. And I'm looking forward to helping Dr. Davis get that archive up and going, and helping him get through all that stuff, because there are boxes and boxes of things in there, and we don't even know what secrets they hold. The end.
Yeah, because you really had me thinking about, like, I got the image of all the boxes and theoretically the boxes that I haven't even seen yet. So one of the things that's, that also brought this on is, so we won a $75,000 grant from Home Depot's Retool Your School. So this was in order to refurnish or remodel the Juanita Williamson room. And basically, with that room being small, we were going to have to get like a $30,000 chandelier to spend up that budget. So what it ended up being is using that, using some of the money to redo the writing center in the library. So we were already kind of researching or talking about Dr. Juanita Williamson, and then we wanted this grant. So that's really what brought the year on. And so then when I'm seeing her work and that she lives in Tennessee, then I had to reach out to her via Facebook and say, you know, like, would you be willing to come on campus, da-da-da-da? And what I love about our interaction is her reaction was basically what any scholar's reaction was, which was excited that one person read her research.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Because I promise you, if anyone reaches out to me about my research, the first reaction is going to be, someone read it? Someone other than my committee read my research? Whatever you want, you know.
Amen.
And I too like to chime in on that. She, Dr. Baddour held also special place in my heart too. So when I was matriculating through my PhD program, we were asked to read a dissertation such as what it looks like, right? And how to write on it, kind of all of it. And so I was searching for dissertations through the ProQuest website, just trying to find one that kind of talked about what I was talking about. And guess who the first name that popped up? Dr. Elizabeth Baddour.
Because it started with B.
Well, it made me so, because it started with a B. And so she was the first dissertation that I actually analyzed and submitted for my PhD assignment. So to hear that she was coming to LeMoyne-Owen College, I just had to meet her. And I was honored to learn that I was going to be serving on the panel with her as well. So
Deeply honored. You read my dissertation?
I did. I was the second person. Yes.
Both a shout out to you, but I think also it's a shout out to Dr. Williamson, because now I'm kind of understanding that he had a relationship with Dr. Williamson before he knew he was going to be at LeMoyne-Owen, thanks to reading your dissertation.
Most definitely. I definitely saw the citations in that.
Now, let's actually get into some of the ideas from your dissertation. So, one of the big arguments that Dr. Baddour essentially is making about Dr. Williamson is that her research predates students' right to their own language, which is a very important document in the English composition field. Specifically, it argues, feel free to jump in, but specifically, it values the languages and the cultures that our students bring with them. So instead of kind of like that old school mantra of you need to learn just the language of power in order to navigate or in order to pass that class, what I'm hoping that me and a lot of your professors do is that you're able to bring your home languages, bring how you talk, bring how your mom and them talk into class, but also that you're learning different ways of expressing yourself, including the quote-unquote language of power. We'll be getting to that in just a second. So I would like you to give us a little bit about what you covered in your dissertation. What are some of the things that you kind of argued about Dr. Williamson's work?
Well, I mean, it's multifaceted, but there's one quote that may or may not be in my dissertation that kind of sums up her philosophy, and this is what it is. Language and rules governing it have traditionally echoed power struggles taking place in the margins of the larger culture. So Dr. Williamson, after she completed her dissertation, she sought to implement this through her embracing of African American vernacular English. And the way that she went about doing that was different than what a lot of folks in the linguistics community were doing. And so it kind of set her at odds with people in her discipline. But here's the problem. Dr. Juanita Williamson was a black scholar activist. She was a female. She had a PhD from the University of Michigan. And guess who ran the show in the linguistics community back in the 60s and the 70s? White males. So automatically her ideas were sifted and in some cases vilified, and her scholarship today should be more quoted and utilized than it is, but a lot of it stems from the cultural milieu in which she found herself. But she resisted hegemony, and she did that through language because she saw that language could be used as a gatekeeping mechanism, and she sought to open that gate, especially to African Americans. So, you want me to read one more thing or what?
You can.
All right, so I'm honored to be here at LeMoyne-Owen today because this is a place that has stood at the crossroads of history and of hope and of transformation. This very campus nurtured the mind of Dr. Juanita Williamson. Class of 1938, she got her PhD in 1961. That was 64 years ago, and I know that because that was the year I was born. I can say that. But she returned here to teach and make a difference. She had many opportunities to go to other institutions. I believe UCLA wanted her. I mean, she was all that you'll eventually find some of this stuff in the archive. But anyway, there are letters in which people sought her teaching skills and her intellect and her theories in the late 70s and early 80s. But she turned it down because she felt she had an obligation to her people here in Memphis. So anyway, so today we're going to reflect on her impact on American writing instruction and her advocacy for linguistic pluralism and the paradoxes that she navigated as one of the earliest defenders of Black English. So, an HBCU is the perfect place to discuss linguistic pluralism because at HBCU, especially LeMoyne-Owen, it's a beacon of leadership, of opportunity, and change. Born in the crucible of emancipation, its mission has always been to prepare African American students not just to survive, but to lead. So Dr. Williamson returned here to her alma mater in 1947 to teach, and she never left. Because she knew what it meant to stand in classrooms filled with students who carried both brilliance and the burden of social bias. So she sought to create a teaching and learning environment where students' voices mattered. Anecdotes from her classrooms reflect this. Students recall Williamson patiently parsing sentences drawn from their own speech pattern. If a student said, "He go to the store," she would not condemn the utterance, and instead she would guide the class in analyzing the pattern behind it. She once told a student, quote, "When you see the system, you see the choice. Then you control the language. It doesn't control you." Now this is back in the 70s, early 70s, when non-conformity, especially by an African-American female, brilliant female with a PhD, that was not relevant. She was a badass, in a word. All right, so her radical teaching meant that students could honor their home language while mastering academic English, gaining agency rather than shame. All right, so her linguistic vision was that Black English is not broken English. It does not need remediating. It is a legitimized dialect within the larger American lexicon. It is rule-driven and systematic, and it's a beautiful language. Features that they're used to identify Black English are neither Black nor white, but American, Dr. Williamson argued in her essay, in her 1957 essay, "What Can We Do About It?" She challenged the prevailing skill and drill approach and thought that rather than labeling dialectal differences as error, she would urge teachers to show students both the structures of standard English and their own dialect in order to help them make a rhetorical choice. So she also said that telling a student it's wrong does not help, so why change, she said. Once she understands the pattern of English, she's well on her way to solving the problem intelligently, she said. So at a time when mainstream composition studies dismissed Black English as ignorance, Williamson insisted on respect, rigor, and recognition. Rhetorical dexterity was her goal. And she she inadvertently set the groundwork for the students' right to their own language resolution, which essentially decentralized standard English as the barometer of the way that we should be taught to speak. She recognized that as a gatekeeping mechanism.
Can we actually take a step back? Because I think it would help to have a larger cultural kind of timeline to understand how some of these conversations are happening. So let's go back to World War II. So at the end of World War II, there's open admissions. That means many of the soldiers that fought in World War II were able to go to college for free. And so that was happening. But then you also had more people of color, more immigrants, more women going to college, going into the 50s and 60s. And so what was happening is we were these students were being met in the classroom, but weren't being helped to learn how to write just by using literature or just by using like Shakespeare. And this question became a larger like community or American-wide question of why Johnny can't write, why Johnny can't read. And so then thus emerged the composition field. While linguistics has already existed, rhetoric had already existed, and English literature had already existed, specific scholars decided that they were going to devote their research specifically to teaching students how to write, how to do academic writing. And one of the bigger arguments basically is that you have to make writing accessible, to students. Have students write about culture, write about themselves, write about things that are going on in the world that they care about. And so Dr. Williamson is free all of this. So by thinking critically about the ways in which class, region, race, all these things inform the language that people use, these ideas would then percolate in the minds of people like Keith Gilyard or Geneva Smitherman, whose work was definitely more geared towards understanding of Black English specifically. So one of the reasons that Dr. Williamson's work or Dr. Williamson's legacy has oftentimes been forgotten or overlooked outside of LeMoyne-Owen is that, think about it, if you're saying that language is not specific to a race or specific to Blackness, but then there's a whole school of scholars, Dr. Davis being one of them, that make a career based on Black English. This is what this is how certain segments of the Black race speak. Well, it's being informed by Dr. Williamson's work, but it also simultaneously kind of erases it. Y'all following what I'm getting at?
And so here's the paradox. This is where the story of Dr. Williamson really gets interesting. On the one hand, Dr. Williamson was a trailblazer. She defended Black English against deficit models that sought to erase it. She normalized Black English as part of the American English landscape. But on the other hand, this is in the early 70s, her contemporaries, most notably Dr. Geneva Smitherman, took a different approach. So in Smitherman's Talking and Testifying, which she wrote in 1977, Smitherman...
A canon piece in Compton.
Yeah. Smitherman insisted that Black English, or African American vernacular English, is not simply American, but distinctly African American. She described it as, quote, the oral tradition which carries the life, soul, and spirit of the Black community. For Smitherman, Black English was more than grammar. It was culture, it was survival, it was resistance. But the difference in the perspective between Dr. Williamson, who insisted that there is no such thing as Black English, it's all American, is what she argued. The difference in this perspective came to a head in 1974 when the Conference on College Composition and Communication, the big league, the governing body that helps us facilitate teaching and composition, they passed the Students' Right to Their Own Language resolution. And the resolution echoed Smitherman's stance that students' home dialects are valid, powerful, and must be affirmed in the classroom. However, Williamson was not an advocate of students' right to their own language, ironically, because she worried that teaching Black English as a racially distinct entity would separate it too sharply from the American mainstream, which would risk further marginalization. So as you recall, Dr. Williamson said there's really no such thing as Black English. It's American English with a Black accent. And then Smitherman took a totally divergent path. So anyway, let's see. So Williamson, here's the paradox. Williamson sought legitimacy by declaring Black English not different, but American. In other words, linguistic differences were geographically informed and not racially informed. This was her big argument. She loved, and some of the things that I found in the archive, she would say, give stories about how she'd be at a conference, a linguistic conference, in which she would promote her theories about Black English. And she would say that Black English is really American English, and she would say, for example, I'm at a linguistic conference, she would say, and I'm sitting next to this linguistic person who is an advocate of Dr. Smitherman, who said that Black English belongs to the Black people. And this white woman would say, excuse me, I'm going to go over here and see my friend for a minute. And she said, did you say amo? Because amo, she argued, is something that is geographical. How many people in here say amo because we're in Memphis? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So that was her stance. And Smitherman was like, no, this is strictly a Black thing. So at that time, it was ironic because Dr. Williamson paved the way for the students' right to their own language, but she held a different perspective that was informed by her experience, her early experience of racism, linguistic racism, and how that colored, so to speak, her scholarship. Because Keith Gilyard categorizes her as a conservative, but I say that she's anything but conservative because she's arguing against everything that's taking place in the field, because all of these white scholars at that time were jumping on the bandwagon of how are we going to teach African American students better in the classroom? But they had no African Americans to lead the charge in this way. And so Dr. Williamson was an activist. She was always at the 4 C's. She was always involved with the Black Caucus. She did so many things because she knew her advocacy mattered. And so she stood up against these things because she believed from her experience this was the way to go. So she saw that, and she was younger than Dr. Smitherman, and so she saw that separate most always meant unequal, and she was not willing to compromise the language that she thought was power to this subverted way of thinking.
So another way, what you have me thinking about, especially engaging Dr. Williamson's theories in contemporary time, is we are living in an era where everything that is considered black or woman or queer or all these things are being attacked and taken out of the curriculum. There's not a day in class that I'm not saying something that if I was in the state of Texas that I could easily get fired for. And so coming back to some of her ideas about living in a white supremacist system that already understands English as the language of power and thus understands everything else as inferior. We're living in the times where it could be next semester where there's an edict put out that there's no such thing as black studies, there's no such thing as black language, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some truth, but I'm kind of in between with Keith Gilyard on the conservative thing, because when reading her work and thinking about her theories, I oftentimes have to say to myself, now this was a bougie black woman from the 1940s and 50s. Now come on now, like let's understand that yes, she has a PhD, and yes, this is your good linguistic composition English sister, but keep in mind, like, this was a different time, and she's writing towards a different ends or different, context.
Definitely. So what do all these paradoxes mean for you as students of LeMoyne-Owen? First of all, it shows that advocacy is rarely simple. Williamson and Smitherman remind us that even among allies, strategies can diverge, but yet, in some ways, they all contribute to the river of progress. Second, it affirms that your voice matters. Whether you choose to lean into standard English or into black English or move fluidly between both of them, the choice is yours. Dr. Williamson made that choice yours. Language is not a prison. It is a toolkit, a birthright, a form of power. Power does not lie in language itself. It is conferred by the institutions that privilege one form over another. And she, at a time in history when it was dangerous for her to do so, she rose up and spoke out. Third, it reminds us of the unique role of HBCUs. This institution nurtured Dr. Williamson. And through her, generations of students, you see how she's already touched so many people. She came to Gilyard, who came to me, who came to Dr. Seth, who could be my son's age, So, and then what's going to happen down the line? Her legacy will continue. We just need your assistance in propelling it forward. LeMoyne-Owen became a space where new approaches to teaching language could be tested, refined, and shared, contributing directly to national debates on linguistic pluralism. So here's the takeaway from Dr. Williamson's advocacy. Embrace complexity. Don't shy away from the paradoxes. The path of justice is rarely straight. Claim your linguistic agency. Speak boldly in your voice, but also learn to navigate other codes with skill. As Williamson showed us, knowledge is power. Honor the HBCU tradition. Remember that the classrooms that you sit in are not ordinary classrooms. They're sacred sites where the struggle for dignity in language, culture, and identity has been and still is waged, thanks to the current administration. So you might want to ask yourselves, how will I form my own voice while building bridges to others? How will I balance identity and opportunity? How will I continue the tradition of LeMoyne-Owen where scholarship fuels social change? Dr. Williamson walked these very halls, a scholar of brilliance and complexity. She taught her students not to abandon their voices, but to understand them, master them, and wield them. And though she differed from Geneva Smitherman and the students' right to their own language resolution, she helped prepare the ground on which those movements flourished. That is the paradox and the beauty of her legacy. So today, as you write your own history, speak bravely, think critically, love your language, honor your roots. Thank you. And if you have any questions?
Well, not to the questions part.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so but I do have a question, and leaning a little bit on Dr. Anderson for this. We've talked about students' right to their own language, and we've talked about linguistic pluralism and the politics of language, but what does the student right to their own language look like in the classroom?
Yes, I can surely speak to that. So, what student rights to their own language should look like in the classroom is that students are supposed to have the right to utilize their native discourse or their primary discourse in the classroom. That is what the law says. But the issue is that many schools, and even sometimes HBCUs, still push this so-called standard American English when it comes to writing papers. So you have to write and speak in this sort of academic language. And so when you are doing that, you are still placing a higher value of that standard American English over African American language, which is what I like to call it, which still stigmatizes not just the language, but also you as a student, since that is what you grew up speaking. And so this kind of leans into a little bit about what my focus is within applied linguistics, which let me clarify what that means. When we're discussing what linguistics is, it is the study of language and real issues revolving around language and what we can actually do to solve them. And so if we're looking at the challenges that African American language speakers face, they face many, right? Especially when it comes into education, because we already know that it is seen as an inferior language variety, correct? Those who speak it primarily may be seen as uneducated or less professional or less competent in general. And so this will cause many issues, especially when it comes to schooling, correct? Because say, for instance, you are coming into school, you're speaking your primary discourse of African American language, and you are being called upon to have to write in this entirely new discourse, this new variety of language, it automatically creates an additional barrier for you when your voice should be heard just as it is in the first place. And so one of the things that I focused on a lot in my dissertation was over what we call family language policy of African Americans. And so within my study, I interviewed African American families specifically from Memphis, and not just the parents. I also interviewed the aunties, the uncles, the grandmas, and the children as well. And so I asked them certain questions about their perspective of African American language and how they actually manage it within their household. Do they allow it? Do they not allow it? Do they speak with their children? Do they allow their children to speak it to them? And I got a lot of mixed findings. Some parents, they stated that they're completely okay with the use of African American language in their household, but they just want their children to understand and be aware that there are different varieties of English. So if you're not at home, say if you're around your school teacher, or you are at a doctor's office or something like that, you have to do what we like to call code switching. And so, yeah, when we think about a code switch, it sounds kind of cool and all, but it is actually further oppressing us as African American speakers because it is a rather coping mechanism that we are using in order to feel like we belong and kind of feel like our words are validated, which actually is still implicit bias toward African American language in general. And so we also had some parents that did not allow African American language to be spoken in their household at all because they wanted their children to quote unquote practice what they needed to do once they got outside of their house. And so they often fixed kind of some of the phrases that they were using with their parents because they even thought that their children may be speaking to them in a rather disrespectful tone if they use said language variety, which I thought was extremely interesting since we know that language race and culture are absolutely tied together. And so that's just one of the major findings that kind of came out of my dissertation study, which I do plan on furthering in the future. And so that kind of brings me to my thoughts as it connects to Juanita Williamson, is when she's discussing African American language as actually being American language, was she actually wrong? Because it kind of reminds me of the argument that black culture is American culture because this nation was actually founded on the backs of black people, correct? So does African American language actually inform this so-called standard American English that everyone else claims to speak? Because as we know, a lot of these contemporary terms and phrases that they now call mainstream came from who? Us. So, thoughts on that?
Well, you gave me a lot to think about, actually.
Well, let me just add, can I add something?
Go ahead.
Okay, so you see it on the media and social media, on television, the appropriation of African American language into everyday vernacular. Like, I got your back, you know, or, I mean, I can't think of some others, but what are some others that's common?
But I think what also is happening with the English language, the conversation is starting too late, as in English itself is a combination of a bunch of different languages to start with. And so when Dr. Smitherman is talking about African American vernacular or Ebonics, she's talking about this type of melding of West African language and meaning, both with English, but also other different languages that were being spoken in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s in the United States as well, you know. And then I'm also thinking about the Caribbean, the larger diasporic, what informs a lot of this stuff. And so I think most of us, especially if you're my age or older, basically have been brought up on the code switching logic, you know, and it has oftentimes even been impressive if you were able, especially as a black person. And even when you were talking about family, I was thinking about dates. I'm like, ooh, that sounds real 80s. Back when you didn't want your kids to say, you sent your kids to that white school so that they would come back sounding white, and you did not want to hear them talking like you at all. And I feel like I was a product of that kind of late 90s coming back to HBCUs, coming back to black culture. But one thing that I ran into going to, the only college that pushed back against me using AAV was Tennessee State University. I was about to graduate, and I was sitting with Dean Heich, the Dean of Residence Life, wherever he is, shout out to him. But I was sitting with the Dean of Residence Life, and I said I was fixing to do something. And he said, I know you ain't fixing to do something, I'm about to graduate from Tennessee State University. And of course, I corrected it. But it wasn't until I was at Syracuse when I was hearing conversations about code switching that actually I was somewhat offended. Because I was like, what do you mean that the way that I talk is not, both my parents have MBAs, so what do you mean about code switching? But then I finally realized that what I was doing and what my parents were doing, shout out to Vershawn Young, was code meshing. You know, a mixture of the language of power and a mixture of African American vernacular. And so, in a lot of ways, I really had to slow down and read some Geneva Smitherman talking and testifying in order to understand, because growing up in the 90s, some of y'all maybe old enough to remember this, is there was a lot of ambivalence, as Geneva Smitherman would say, linguistic ambivalence, specifically around Ebonics. Black folks were some of the main people saying that it was ridiculous, you know? Like you would, and like you were saying, you would see these white, educated professors understanding the beauty of AABE, while most black folks you knew were like, no, that ain't gonna work, so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So let me add some color to some of the things that he's talking about, especially when it comes to the topic of code switching. And so if we look at it from a linguistic lens and we see the research behind it, it actually stems from a totally different meaning than what we say code switching is in African American language. And so that also alludes to the semantical differences that we have in African American language between the so-called standard American English. So in other research, it says that code switching is the use of one or more discourse or languages within one discourse. So, for an example, you may have an individual that speaks English and Spanish, and they may incorporate some Spanish words into their English phrases. In other words, we call this Spanglish, right? So everyone has heard this. And so this is a classic definition of code switching. But when we hear us refer to code switching, we're more so thinking about us completely turning that African American language off when we get to certain social contexts, like at school or at work, right? That is a different meaning. That's not the actual same thing that we're talking about. And so that is what he's discussing when he referred to the linguist Vershawn Young, which we actually brought him in one day to speak at the University of Memphis. And he's encouraging code meshing, which is more so the blending of African American language, perhaps, and the so-called standard American English together in order to convey your message more effectively, which I think actually speaks directly to students' right to your own language. You don't have to turn anything on or turn anything off. You can use both at the same time. And it's almost impossible that you don't, because since language is directly tied to your identity, it's going to kind of squish out the edges anyway. I know when I'm teaching my classes in English communications, I don't try to hide it. Yeah, sometimes it may sound like I'm using this formal academic language, but the thing is, and I'm going to be doing this, these habitual B's, these irrelate, other features of African American language, like the dropping of the vocal B, all that is still going on while I'm conveying my message to a mixture of audiences.
So now at this time, I would like to turn it to the audience. So we've been doing a lot of different discussion about the role that language plays, language of power, and even whether or not we should even use language of power as a term or a phrase anymore, I think is up for discussion too. But is there anything on you all's mind about language or about culture, or even about what's going on now in the larger world, you know, and how these theories kind of engage with what's going on?
Hello. I'm a Williamson fan because I've been in meetings and in conferences where I would hear this word Black English, and I was like, okay, now what exactly is that? And most of the time what I'm hearing is broken English. And I said, well, broken English is spoken by every ethnicity. And so what's the difference between broken English that a person of color speaking and broken English that an Irish American or any other American is speaking? So I'm always cautious when we use terms and then we use examples of, and I totally agree with you, Dr. Davis, we need to come up with another word than standard. Because, like you were just saying, with words of power, it's like, okay, now, but my words are of power, and it's spoken by an African American woman. So, to me, that is language, and I don't like to identify one way or another. Sometimes I use, and we've talked a lot about speech, but not a lot about writing. And so, as we speak, which is totally different and dynamic than how we write, because our audience is usually immediate. It's right in front of us, and we get cues from that audience. And so, what is vernacular and what is necessary to communicate effectively to an audience that's not in front of you? So I don't know if it's a question, just a comment, of the idea that we may need to rethink how we are even talking about how we communicate in the 21st century, which has become very, as you said, plural. I hear fixing from white Southerners more than I hear from Black Southerners, so how that become economics for us? So word choices, inflection, pacing, all those things come into play. So I think we probably, as Dr. Williamson has done, complicate the matter a little bit.
Yeah, it needs to be complicated, but I feel like, just like when I hear people say, one of my pet peeves when talking to Black people about even tones, now we're not talking about language, is when I meet a Black person and they say, so-and-so says I talk white, as if one could talk white or talk Black.
Exactly.
I hear what they're saying when they say that, but I don't agree. I don't agree with the saying that one doesn't talk, that language isn't racist. I believe it is. And so oftentimes when I'm having a conversation with someone who feels that way, one of the first things I get to is tone and content. So coming back to something Dr. Anderson said about code switching, Code switching isn't just about switching off the language, it's about switching off culture, references, everything in order. Like, for instance, one of the issues I have with some of my students sometimes is when trying to figure out a topic to write that they have to choose, they have already chosen that the things that they care about have nothing to do with this classroom, you know. And so coming back to the conversation about code switching, the examples that they used weren't necessarily broken English. These were examples of how West African dialects and languages have been embedded and also have built up what we consider standard academic English. Does that make sense? So with that being said, you want to take it?
I was interested in
Oh,
But I think we need more examples of that. Sometimes, usually what I'm hearing is...
Two books I would definitely recommend are Geneva Smitherman's Talking and Testifying and Geneva Smitherman's Word from the Mother. So these are two books where she traces hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of African American English all the way back to West African beginnings. So that's something that I would definitely encourage people to check out.
And see, Dr. Williamson, she disagreed with Dr. Smitherman on the origins of Black English in America. Dr. Williamson believed that Black English came from overseers because they didn't speak good English and they were using permutations of the King's English, and so that's how it all got started. And then she would use references from Shakespeare. In her archive, you might run across something where she says Shakespeare uses the verb act, and she cites that as part of being incorporated in the Black vernacular. I'm going to ask you a question. So anyway, there's that. Another point of disagreement.
But I think still one of the things that traps some of Dr. Williamson's ideas up is if you start with English as a solid language and then compare everything or then try to understand everything from that frame, that's how everything falls into this English is legit, but everything else is just a dialect type of thing.
Yeah.
You know. Other questions or comments?
So going off of code switching, code meshing, so as for me, I'm an English lover. I love languages, I love learning languages. And it's also the idea of code switching has gone through such a back and forth in society, as in it's bad to code switch, it's good to code switch. Code switching is what keeps you alive, but it's also what people probably look down for. Because, in other words, you're in the past, you could be seen as like an Uncle Tom trying to please the white man for code switching.
Barack Obama oftentimes is both celebrated but also criticized for his ability to change who he is. And I'm sorry, this is going to even go into sexual literacies. That theoretically is considered a good thing to be able to flip and meet whatever perspective or expectation of the audience. And to a certain extent, we're even teaching that type of versatility in our class. But what I like that Kennedy is bringing out is this is, or the phrase that Dr. Smitherman would talk about is linguistic ambivalence. Is that it's not so simple as you become white and life is good, especially as a Black person. You are always ebb and flowing. And one thing that I always joke about with my fraternity brothers is that every alpha I know is the bougiest, whitest scholar and the realest nigga from around the way. You know, if you talk to them. Like, if you follow them around enough in a conversation. No, I would use Earl Fisher. No, Earl Fisher is both of those things. And to a certain extent, and I actually give him credit for legitimately being those things, but it becomes a survival thing to play both positions. You know, I'm the whitest feminist at work, but then in the barbershop, I'm a real brother type stuff. And so it's not just, and when we take it all the way that, and we're not just talking about race, we're talking about gender to a certain extent, we're talking about sexuality to a certain extent, and even being from Memphis, something to play up and play down. So.
And even adding to that, would you say having that literacy of knowing these different languages and knowing these different codes to switch to and back and forth would help people to grow as to be more open-minded and actually open their minds and their perspective up into learning, or to be able to learn?
I fully agree, and I think that's why students' right to their own language came about in the first place, is like understanding that both the limitations of students, but how, like one thing that I scream in class all the time is bring it to class, bring your experiences, bring the culture that you consume, because that's what you already are, even if you don't realize it, that's what you're thinking critically about already. That's what you care about. I'm trying to get you to care about a thesis statement, but you already care about what you care about.
Speaking about the South, I grew up in the dirty South, almost mile zero, South Florida. And there was a language that was used prevalently by the majority of blacks from Florida to Mississippi, so to speak. Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and maybe South and North Carolina. Not sure about those two. But it was a language where blacks wanted to speak in code called Pig Latin. Don't know if you all are familiar, where you would take the first consonant of a word and then put it on the second word, just say dog. It would be all day. So you would take the first consonant and add it to AY at the end, so it would be all day for dog.
That came up in a lot of 90s sitcoms. Pig Latin.
My thinking has changed so much over the years. Because I remember when I was little, it was always a moment where we did pig Latin. And it wouldn't even be pig Latin anymore, we would be saying stuff. Saying pig Latin.
But they would be speaking in code, so to speak. Others wouldn't understand as you were, which was really brilliant in a way. I mean, because they would rattle off sentences and just talk unbeknownst to those of us who were not familiar with Pig Latin.
And you're even making me think of my research on black queer literacies of like shade. One black idiom or scenario I use to explain shade to people. Imagine we are in the big house and we're serving dinner, and something extreme happens, and I have to find some way to make eye contact with someone across the room so that we know what just happened and we have a conversation. These are the circumstances that make literacies like that breed in, I would say oppression, but breed in specific communities. And so what you're making me think about is codes, that there's always new language, always new ways of using language, and that how much of that is informed by context and situation. Were you about to say something? I didn't cut you off.
No, you're fine. As an English professor, I am very conflicted when we are thinking about this connection between the oral use of African American language and the written version of it. Because yes, we in this room understand the value of AAL, but say if I'm allowing that type of writing to occur in my classroom, am I doing my students a disservice? Because eventually I'm not going to be the professor anymore, and they're going to run across an old school white professor, especially if they want to go to grad school at the University of Memphis or Rhodes or somewhere, that is not going to accept that in their classroom. And so I guess my thought to other English professors in the room, how do you navigate that situation?
One, Dr. Anderson, the vast majority of things are in standard academic English. So if they spend 20 minutes in your class writing in their natural language, that is not doing anything to the larger system of inequality that is still centering standard academic English. And so what even happens if we bring this into the classroom? Well, one thing, let me rewind. What you just said really is the conservative black perspective on teaching African American vernacular. Like, not new, not unique. Someone says that every year in every context at every seminar. And again, one more time, coming back to this larger system, you're saying they're eventually going to get out of my class and be in someone's white's class. See, that's the damn problem, y'all. One, that everybody still only sees the world through. Eventually, everyone's going to be in front of some old white man who thinks, old straight white man who thinks standard, when in real life, their next professor is likely going to be a black woman who is just as conservative as you. Just keeping it real. And I'm talking about LeMoyne-Owen College. And so if you give students the opportunity to speak another language in an essay, still the vast majority of that essay is going to be standard English. When we're using Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street, or when we're using Laura Anzaldúa in class, yes, there's Spanish in there, but the vast majority of it is standard academic English. So I think sometimes we're like, well, what if we don't prepare students for the future? One assignment, one unit of English 111 where they can use their own language ain't gonna do anything to a whole system of inequality.
Well, can I say, I'm confused now because they use their own language. So I'm not quite understanding what is your authentic voice in your own language, which I preach to my students. I need to hear you in whatever you are trying to express, but I need to clearly hear you. And so I'm not understanding what AAL looks like in writing if we're talking about it's not going to be something that's understood. And so I'm teaching students, look, you have a voice, and you're absolutely right. What are your experiences? You have observations and experiences. Bring them to the table. I had a student today that said she was trying to write about immunization. I said, I'm sorry. Oh, Lord, what's going on today? Immunization, yeah, no, the other one, where they're kicking folks out.
Immigration?
Immigration, and I was like, well, what do you, I said, has something happened personally to you that's related to, immigration? No. I said, well, why do you want to write about that? I don't get that. She was like, you know what, I'm so sick of having this, I'm going to write about PTSD over something. She has PTSD of something that's really strange about basketballs. And I was like, write about that. She said, you know what, I'm going to go home and work on that right now. Her whole demeanor changed. So it's still, I need her to take ownership of the themes and topics and write it in your own voice. I'm not dinging you for writing what I hear is your voice. I'm saying I need to make sure that whatever you leave in the world is clear to someone who's reading it. So I'm not trying to down their voice and how they use the language. I don't even use the word standard English in my classes. I just want to hear what you have to say and hear it clearly. So I'm not quite sure what AAL is in relation to, you just mentioned in writing, and it's not conservative or liberal, I just don't understand at this point.
So those are two different things. So one, the question of what is African American language or African American vernacular or Ebonics, that's one question. But then also the question of students' right to their own language that includes African American vernacular, but is not limited to just that discussion. So one, if you want more information on African American vernacular language, I've recommended a couple of books that you could definitely check out that will give you a larger history and larger context for different words and how they came about and how they're being used. Now, when we're talking about students' right to their own language in writing, in my mind, what I'm coming with is certain things that are said the best way don't have to be translated. So I'm thinking of Spanish. Now, you know I don't speak Spanish, I'm getting this from Selena. One of the first things that we all asked when we got a Spanish class in high school was, what does bitty bitty bamba mean? And the first thing that Senor Carter said to me is that it does not translate. Am I right? For people who speak Spanish, that it doesn't translate directly. So you keep bitty bitty bamba in your paper because there's not an English translation that does better work than that little phrase. And then I feel like that now this is personally that there are plenty of what we would consider black sayings that are clearer in less words than if you use standard English to flesh them all the way out. And so when I'm talking about students' right to language in the writing is you're not trying to translate and jump and make it something else. You're talking about what you're talking about, but you're using the necessary support and explanation needed. Because there are sometimes, again, where African American vernacular or a different language is actually the better way to talk about the subject.
And I think that plays into the idea as professors, we might ought to lean toward valorizing a student's voice rather than correctness. So if she gets passionate about her basketball PTSD, she's going to be more apt to, you're going to be more apt to hear her voice in that and maybe she says something like it just bees that way, like Geneva Smitherman, which it just summarily and succinctly sums up the subject, rather than saying, no, it just bees that way is incorrect, because that's not standard English. There's that dichotomy.
And,
I think we had a question from the audience.
and let me say one more thing. Also using Adam Banks. So Adam Banks is a scholar in the composition field. And so in his C's address, one thing that he said that the essay needs to be promoted to Professor Emeritus. That the literal written essay that we write needs to, as it literally has a role on campus. However, it shouldn't be centered in the work that we do in the composition classroom. And so he's saying this in order to get us to start coming up with more assignments that are far more critically relevant, but are still doing the same strategies, tools of academic writing that we traditionally understand. So I just wanted to throw that out there too, that we're not just talking about the language used or literal writing, but even the types of assignments and what we expect from our students are supposed to be informed by students' right to their language.
I have more of a comment, but now once we got into using language in writing, I got completely sidetracked in my thought. But my original thought was mostly about using African American language within speaking. And I think nowadays, since we have social media and how everything is now easily obtainable, it is extremely impossible to say that there are groups of people who may say this could be misunderstood because it is so popular to be in westernized culture, which is Black culture. It is impossible to not know, period now. It's impossible to not know hand gestures or finger taps, queer language, Black language. It's completely impossible to not know even subtle things that Black people do in moving, in the way our facial expressions are when communicating. And I thought it was just interesting to, when hearing that, oh, we have to conform into this way of speaking to be better understood or to even get an A. I just thought that was just interesting. Because I know about social media, of course, it's extremely popular to be Black and queer, or even Black, and use these different gestures in the shoulder. The way I just move my shoulder just did.
But let's mess with that, because she's talking about how some of these, like, let's say Black or Black queer literacies or way of speaking or slang terms have become mainstream or start to be appropriated by the dominant culture. But one thing that I think that Dr. Smitherman definitely encouraged me to think about, not personally, but in her research and in my dissertation, is there's still an ambivalence to it. Like we've talked about in class that a Black man may know what shade is, the straight Black man may know what a shade is, but he may also try to act like he doesn't so that you don't think he's queer, you know? And so keep in mind, not just with sexual language or sexual culture language, but also with race, that we see. I can name them all day. What's every white artist that basically steeps themselves in Black culture for the first 2 albums and then throws it away? Pink, Post Malone, Ariana Grande. So all of these aren't just examples of how the culture is appropriated, but they're examples of the ambivalence towards Black culture, because these things have to be stripped off of these white people too. You know?
Oh, you just
He does have class too.
I had a comment. So like, I was just in the game room today, and like this guy, straight guy, I know what I was just saying. I'm not gay, but clock, and I was like, that first part wasn't me. Like everybody knows what clock it is, and now everyone's kind of like taking it to their own definition. But it's kind of like.
So real quick, in the ballroom scene when people are performing, sometimes this is like applause.
Yeah.
And so now it's kind of got appropriated by straight Black women to mean clock it, meaning I see you, but also I know that's right, amen.
Yeah. And like, I feel like, well, because I worked in the workforce for a couple of years, and it seemed like when non-Black people use Black language, they were also kind of rewarded for doing it. Kind of like seems like cool and hip. And then when we use it, we're deemed upon as like uneducated, unintelligent, and like also like ghetto.
They're more worldly and exposed when they use,
So then, like, it's kind of seemed like I remember I went to Baddour High School, and then I went to the Craven, but my mom would say, like, you know, I don't want you to be like that. I don't want you to talk like that. I need you to be with these white people so that you can know how to move and navigate through the world. It's kind of like you have to de-simulate what you've known your whole life and like all your peers know to then build this person that can make it to the white world. And like, I just kind of feel like how do we, can we say it's a whole system that we're like living in? How do we start to dismantle that? Like, because I don't like code switching. I really don't. I think it's pandering to the white man, and I don't want to do that. But then at the same time, like certain interviewers won't call you for callback interviews. Certain people won't like. And I'm trying to say it's almost like we have to, but how can I make it work for me? Because I don't want to have to clean it up every time just to get a job.
and not to mention, we're prepping you for a different job market than we were invited into. So that's another thing. So again, jobs and businesses that don't exist now are the jobs that you guys are going to be getting. But also, I think one thing that we run up against at LeMoyne-Owen, and I've even had to have conversations with Dr. Christopher Davis about this. At one of the chapels, he said, well, if you graduate from LeMoyne-Owen without a job, you basically got a high school diploma with a star. And I was in there like, what? Beyond the fact that that's messing with your business model. You go on beyond that. But two, no, because again, we're in a era in education where folks are getting these degrees in order to get a job. It limits oftentimes y'all's imagination and sometimes our imagination for you, you know.
I was kind of piggyback off that because when he had said that if you leave without a internship, basically under your belt, then you're pretty much leaving with a high school diploma. And I took offense to
That's
that.
like what he said.
Yeah, I took offense to that because as an English major under humanities with creative writing, I feel like myself looking for an internship is different from a business major or a computer science major or a biology major looking for one. Because there are outright jobs for them. They can find labs, they can go in administration, they can actually go out and get that legal document cementing their business. But as for writers, that's more of a you have to find it yourself or you have to create it yourself. And for you to, and that basically cemented down to me, if I don't leave here without a job or an internship or knowing somebody or connection under my belt, then you're basically saying I'm setting myself up to fail.
Yeah. And then LeMoyne-Owen advertising itself as a liberal arts college, and it's like, well, are you?
We are.
And especially when you look at the internship, it's like, look at the career services, Everything under there is, they cater to business, computer science,
Cybersecurity,
nursing, and even under humanities. Oh, you can go work in a museum.
It's small.
You can go work in a museum. You can go be a tour guide.
A teacher.
Well, as much as I could join you in hating on them for that, we also got to kind of be real and say that ain't totally disproportionate with the conversations and what the job market has been. Because definitely graduating with an English degree, I was told by English professors, they ain't hiring in literature,
Or you're not gonna make any money.
Right, and like you, Janiyah, I was the one that was being told every year at TSU, so what you want to do with that communications degree?
Yeah.
It's complicated, but when I'm talking to Dr. Davis about it, it's about finding kind of a happy medium. That it's like seeing the liberal arts element of LeMoyne-Owen as part of its power, as a resource, not something that, because what happens is, and especially at a school like this, is you try to compete with everyone else about their specialty.
Yes.
And as Dr. Fisher would say, you're not going to out-business University of Memphis.
No.
You're not going to out-liberal arts roles. But coming back to LeMoyne-Owen as the source of Black excellence, and we produce scholars that go on to do great things. Now we're really talking about something, because y'all are getting something from this school that you ain't gonna get nowhere else, So with that being said, I would like to thank everybody for coming to this event tonight. Now, any last questions before before I close?
Um,
Or comments? Does that sound like a comment? That ain't sound like a question.
Well, I would like to, we would like to introduce the LOC English Club. We will be having an interest meeting Friday, October 10th at 4 p.m. in Steel Hall No. 5. If you would like to come out, please come join us. We're going to be talking about upcoming events, activities, things we are going to do and would like to do, and just, if you're going to meet new people and share general interests, please come. I'll beg you, please. We would love to have you. We will have food. We will feed you.
Sounds like recruitment. Look at y'all trying to do something. All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming out. I think Dr. Williamson would be proud of the discussion that we're having today. That it wasn't just about her and her research, but it was about larger issues of writing, research, and social change. So again, be on the lookout for future events under the Year in Juanita Williamson banner. Specifically, January 16th is when we are ribbon cutting for the two centers that we have named after her. So that's when we're going to have our Home Depot people coming and taking pictures and the whole news thing with that. So be on the lookout. We may do another event this semester, and be on the lookout for next semester.
All right.
Okay. Thank y'all for coming out. And feel free to check out a various language, which is celebrating 80-something. I forget what the actual number is.
I don't remember.
So this was 71. So it ain't 80. But what is 71? How old was somebody? Well, you were 61, so 10 less than you. No, I'm talking about how old is this now? How old are you? But you know how old you are, though.
Oh, I'm 64.
So then this is 54. Okay, 54 years of a various language. Okay. I care nothing about it. I included that in another speech. I didn't want to